Alright, welcome to lesson 3. And lesson 3 we'll be looking at the introduction to hydraulic power assist steering. Alright, so what we're supposed to achieve at the end of this video now, we're going to explain the main purpose of hydraulic power assist system. We're going to identify the parts that make up the power hydraulic system. We're going to inspect the parts, then I will explain the operation. So what is the main purpose of the hydraulic power assist system? Remember, in lesson 2, we were looking at manually operated rock and pinion. And we said that the major limitation with the manual rock and pinion is that it requires a lot of manpower, a lot of muscle power. The steering wheel is extremely hard to turn. So because of that, we want the steering wheel to become easier and lighter. We have some form of power assist. And this power assist in the form of hydraulic force. And so let us look on the parts on the vehicle now, and the parts that make up this hydraulic system. What makes this hydraulic system unique? Let us look on those components over there on the vehicle. Here we have the reservoir. Here we have the reservoir, and the reservoir is where fluid is stored. Alright, the reservoir is where fluid is stored. Then, and as I can see with the reservoir, we have hose, and there are two hoses. In this case, the reservoir is remote to the pump. So these hoses actually, one of these hoses is actually a return. This one is actually a return from the rock and pinion, and this hose is a supply hose to the pump. Here is the pump. Here is the pump, and the pump, here we have the bracket. This pump is driven by a belt, and this belt is driven from the crankshaft pulley, and here we have the pulley, here we have the belt, and this belt is driven from the crankshaft pulley. Alright, this hose will run and come straight to the rock and pinion round here. So this hose will run and come straight to the rock and pinion round here. Alright, and let us look on the other side of the rock and pinion. And this is how it look when it bolts up on a vehicle. Right here would have the control valves, because I can see it will be coming out of the vehicle. So right here would have the control valves, and let us see if I can move this hose. And here is the rock and pinion. These are the two hoses that supply to the control valves, and these two pipes would supply fluid to the power cylinder in the rock and pinion. These two pipes right here to the power cylinder. And if you look further down here, you'd see the grommet. This would be the bracket. Right here would be the bracket, and with the bracket you have a grommet rubber where the rock and pinion would be bolted to. And also right here is also another bracket with grommet rubber where the rock and pinion is bolted to. And in this particular system, the rock and pinion is bolted to the firewall of this vehicle, not necessarily to the subframe. So this is what a hydraulic rock and pinion would look like when it is out of the vehicle. Alright, so those are the parts to identify. A matter of fact, let us inspect these parts. Here again we have the reservoir. Although this look oily, I deliberately oil it to really let it look more obvious. So we'll inspect the reservoir if there any leak. The hose, we will inspect for any leak. The pump, we'll ensure that this pump is bolted up properly. See, I'm trying to move it from the bracket. I cannot move it, so it is bolted up rigidly. The belt, there is no wear and tear on this belt, and it is firm. Alright, it is extremely firm. This belt here is extremely firm. And then when we look around the rock and pinion right here, there is no leaking pipe. Of course, the rock and pinion itself is another thing that we'll have to deal with. Well, there is no leaking pipe. Alright, so, and this is these two pipes that go to the control valve. These two pipe that supply the power cylinder. So this system physically speaking, it is okay. And here is a hydraulic rocker and pinion. This is how it look like when it is removed from the vehicle. This is what a hydraulic rocker and pinion is look like when it is taken from the vehicle. Here, of course, when our steering wheel turn, fluid with supply from the pump, the high pressure pump, to the control valves. And one of these pipe would be a supply, and one of these pipe will be a return. So one would supply fluid from the pump to the control valve. This is right here. So both the control valves and the pinion gear would be in the same housing right here. And then these two pipes now is what would supply fluid to what is here right here is we call a power cylinder. So these two pipes will supply fluid in the power cylinder. Alright, and with the manual rocker and pinion, you can see the same parts are on the hydraulic rocker and pinion. The two component that is added to the manual rocker and pinion to make it an hydraulic rocker and pinion is the control valves and the power cylinder, which is right here. Alright, so I have made a sketch of the hydraulic layout of the hydraulic system, and here we have a drawing of the hydraulic system, starting with the pulley. Alright, so the pulley is driven by a belt, and this belt is driven from a crankshaft pulley, normally a V belt, or it can be any belt. Once a belt is a belt. And then we have the pump. The pump is what would pressurize the fluid. And of course the pump normally have a pressure relief valve, of course. And this pressurized fluid now will travel from the pump and come to the control valve, which is right here. And from the control valves, the fluid under pressure will enter this power cylinder right here, power cylinder, both left and right. And this red, this seal is what separates the different chambers. So from the control valves, fluid will leave from the control valves, and either the fluid is directed into the left or into the right. And this would be pressurized fluid coming from the pump. Of course, the regulator valves, it reduce some of the pressure. Alright, this excessive fluid now, for example, whenever we move to the left or move to the right, we consume a lot of fluid because there are empty space within the power cylinder that we have to accumulate with the fluid. Whenever we straighten up the steering, there's no need for this excessive fluid. So this fluid now in the control valves now will leave from the control valves and return back to the reservoir, and then the cycle continues. So looking on this hydraulic layout, this is a basic system. Things to take into consideration: a hydraulic pump normally have a grounds wire or some form of mechanism to increase the engine RPM when there's excessive load or excessive hydraulic force required from the pump. And since the pump is driven by the engine, when the pressure increase, the engine power will decrease, especially at idling. So some mechanism normally placed in the pump to facilitate engine RPM picking up. And other than that, as you can see, what we learned in lesson 2 is basically we still have our tie rod hen, we still have our rock hen, we still have our rock gear. And what made this hydraulic rocker and pinion unit is the power cylinder and the control valves. And the additional parts are the fluid line and hose, the pump, the reservoir, the pulley, the belt. And with all these components, it is what guide us and help us in our hydraulic system operation. So as you can see, we explain the purpose, in split, and the part. Alright, what are the advantages and the limitation of the hydraulic system? That's what we want to look on another time. The advantage is that the hydraulic system, it aid the driver pertaining to let the steering much softer and easier to operate. That is a major disadvantage. It leads to comfort. Anybody can drive the vehicle. The disadvantage is that it is more expensive to operate. It requires more engine power. It takes up more space, and the system can subject it to leak. And with all the limitation with the manual rack and pinion, the hydraulic system have those limitations in addition to the hydraulic components. So let us take a look again on this rack and pinion. Control valves, power cylinder, and it still has a rack gear. As I can see, the rack gear is right here. Still has a rack gear. I can turn it. The rack gear is right here. The tie rod hen, the rack hen. So we still have the same parts. So let us summarize now. In summary, we explain the purpose of the hydraulic power assist system, and we said it's to aid the driver in making the steering wheel much easier. We identify the major parts that make up the hydraulic system, starting from the belt, pulley, pump, reservoir, hose, control valves, and those are the major parts. We inspect the parts and there was any physical defect to say, and we explain the operation with this diagram right here. Fluid pressurized by pump, go to the control valves. The control valves direct the fluid under high pressure, whether in the left or the right of the power cylinder. Excess fluid is returned back to the reservoir. And with all these components, so once you know the components, and then we look at the advantages, and the advantages that it's much easier, lighter to operate, and the limitation is that it's more expensive, it is bigger, consume engine power, more to service, and of course you can develop leaks. So that is it for our hydraulic power assist steering. The next system we'll be looking at next is the electro hydraulic system. Thank you.